Hello, beautiful people. How are you? My name is Gloria Lorraine. You can call me Lorraine. Some people call me Glow. Either way, lately I have been sitting down and talking about true crime. So if it's something that you're interested in, let's go. Today, um, how are y'all? I'm super excited because I recently found out that there are a lot more true crime makeup YouTubers, and I'm actually gonna link some of them below. I fell in love with them. The original one was Bailey. I know mentioned that in my first video, and she was the one that inspired me, but I have found out that she has inspired so many others. So I'm gonna go ahead and try my best to tag them below. But today we are going back to the UK. We did a UK story last week or on Sunday, and we're gonna go back. So, and I'm thinking on Sundays and Wednesdays is when I'm gonna go ahead and be posting the two times. So let's go. On February 15th, a 911, oh no, it's 999 dispatch from a gentleman called Ankar, and they're Indian, guys. And I do want to do a disclaimer because there are children involved in this one, but they're Indian, and I'm gonna have some trouble pronouncing their names, and I do apologize, but I'm gonna go ahead and put it right here so that you could see him. His name was Ankar, and he called in 999 authorities. He was from New Zealand, saying that he has not heard from his mom or his sister and that they speak every day. So it was very unusual that he hadn't heard from them. The police officials went ahead and looked into it, but they started noticing whenever they started speaking to their neighbors and things like that, the majority of them said they went back to India and that was their prerogative. The husband was named Anil. Chochan, Cho, Chokin, Chokan, Chokin. He owned a freight company, and he sold the company. From what the employees were saying, he sold the company and he went ahead and booked it out to back to India with his family. It was him, his two children, and his wife, his two children, and his mother-in-law. And that was what everyone was saying. He just took off. And Ankar was not really accepting that because he said that he knew his mom and his sister, that they would speak every day. So it was very, very unusual. So he took it upon himself to come to the UK and go visit the house that they were staying in. And when he went in, everything was still there. He said that there was still uncooked food and it was everything there, that the clothes were there. Didn't really look like they had moved. It looked like they kind of left abruptly. When he went back to the police, he was telling them, look, I found my mom's Bible and I know that she would never go anywhere without this Bible. She's very, very religious. I know something's wrong. We need to look into it. So the police officials began to look into what happened, just to make sure everything was good. It wasn't good. We wouldn't be here. So they look into his company. He owned a freight company. It's a trucking company called Seba. And there were two new owners, the owners that he had sold it to. It was a gentleman called Keith Regan and a Belinda Bowen. They start looking into both of them. Belinda was a socialite. She was going through a divorce. She had children, and she was just kind of trying to get back on her feet. But she was known as part owner. Kenneth Regan was a ex-convict for tax evasion. He was known by the name Captain Cash. He was described as kind of cocky, more of like a rich white boy. They would say he had no class, but he would carry around suitcases full of money. But he was just he used his money to get what he wanted. He was connected to a lot of rich families in London. He was known as a drug smuggler, which is where he was getting all his money. Him and Belinda met in the 1990s, closer to the 2000s. Belinda said that she was pursued by Regan, but she didn't really like him very much, but he was wealthy, so she kind of was just like, oh well. But Regan was very interested in her, but they couldn't really develop their relationship because Regan was caught on June 17th of 1998 with 25 kilos of heroin, and he was instantly detained and charged with drug smuggling. Regan was on that why do 10 when you can tell on a friend. He was facing 18 years, but he wasn't having that. So he ended up helping the authorities come down on at least 12 more convicts, and he was able to only do 4 years. When Regan got out, he had no money, told on a lot of his friends, so he didn't have very many friends either. And so he was beginning to work at the freight company with Mr. Anil. He started off as a driver, and he was just trying to get back on his feet. He shortly after started trying to get a hold of Belinda. He had her in mind, honey. He was still thinking about her, and he called her up. Belinda was at this point going through a divorce, and she was no longer in town. She ended up going to Dorsey. She was living in the country, and Regan just wanted to be there for her. He would try to see her. He would, want to be helping her fix up her house and things like that. And Belinda still wasn't interested. Well, one day, Anil and Regan were talking because Anil's wife, Nancy, continued to ask, she wanted to go back to India. Her children were young. She had an 18-month-old and a 3-month-old, and she was just wanting to go back to India because the education system was different. It was more advanced, and she really wanted to take that into consideration. So she, her and Anil talked about selling the company to go back to India. Had accomplished a lot, and they just wanted to retire and go and be with the children. Well, Regan was already again connected to a lot of rich London families, so he was like, hey, let me look into it for you. At least let me see what we can pull off, and maybe we could get you a deal. Regan tells Anil, hey, I found somebody that wants to make an offer for $5 million. They're really interested in buying the company. And Anil was considering it again, but he didn't take the offer too soon. But eventually he told Regan, go ahead and set up the meeting and I'll check it out. So he does. And at the time, he begins to let Belinda know, hey, I'm coming across this business deal. I can probably get you a job where I'm at. And again, Belinda was just going through a divorce, so she was struggling to pay her bills with her children. So they negotiated a salary of 75 a year. And she takes the offer. Well, on February 15th, Neil meets up with the investors, and him and Regan go out to meet these investors because he didn't know who he was dealing with. So he brings out Regan, and then they were supposed to go meet up. So the next day, Regan shows up with Belinda, and he introduces to the employees, this is going to be the part owner of the company, and Anil is making his arrangements to go to India. He typed up a farewell letter for y'all because they were really busy, so they couldn't really have much time to let it soak in. They had said it was a rumor, but nothing was ever official. And when Regan came back saying, oh, it's done deal, Anil left. They did find it odd because that wasn't really Anil's character. But again, they were busy, so they didn't really have much to think about. They couldn't really think about it because there was just so much work, is what they were saying. And they kind of just left it at that. Well, Belinda, the second day, she was supposed to go into work, but she did say that she had gotten very, very sick and she couldn't go into the office. So she ended up, after taking her kids where they needed to go, she ended up just turning back around and going back home. But she ended up finding two men at her house, and she kind of freaked out, and she was just like, what are y'all doing here? And they said, oh, Regan sent us. And she was just like, why? They were digging a drain ditch, and she kind of was very thrown off by it. But when she had spoke with Regan, he was just like, well, yeah, I couldn't go, so I sent my two guys over there to do it for you. And she was just, well, we didn't agree on this. And he said, well, it's gonna have to wait for the summer to put it back because it was just so wet and damp. So she just kind of was saying like, fine, whatever. So they would come and do work by the house. She was just like, fine. It was a man to help around the house type of thing. And she began to, see Regan in a different light just because he was just, always consistently trying to help her. Well, back to the 911 or 999 phone call. They took Onkar a little bit more serious after they start pulling all of Regan's criminal history. And what flags it is that Regan was previously convicted for drug smuggling. And they saw it as the freight company would be very, very ideal for drug smuggling because the bonded trucks would get into bonded warehouses. So they look into Regan just a little bit more. They really weren't liking what they were finding. When they started questioning Regan, he said no, Anil really did leave. He kind of was a very, very unsavory businessman, that he was doing illegal things and he was in debt with a lot of people, so he couldn't stay. He had to leave very abruptly. They really weren't buying it, but they kind of, went with it. they start questioning Belinda, and Belinda was, just talking about it with Regan. And she said, yeah, I'm supposed to meet them today at my house. We're supposed to go to my house today. We're supposed to, talk. And Regan kind of got upset, talking about they have no business at your house. They just want to find something on you. You need to meet them anywhere else but your house. They really don't have any business at your house. And she was just like, well, I don't really care. I mean, that's fine if they want to come to my house. And so before the police were able to get there, Regan gets a phone call from Anil, stating that he was still in the States, but he said that he wanted to finish up some paperwork. He told the police that he was going to be able to meet Regan and he'll show them exactly where he was. They had set up a meeting spot, but when the day of the meeting, they pull up Regan and then one of the guys that helps him to do the work at the house, at Belinda's house. It was him. His name was Horsey, William Horsey. The two men that would continue to do work at Belinda's house was a gentleman called William Horsey and Peter Reese. So Horsey was with Regan, and he had showed up at the meeting site where they were supposed to meet Anil. So come the day that Regan and Anil are supposed to meet up, the police officers say that when they get up to the meetup spot, they spot Horsey and Regan, and you could see Regan get a phone call and then just kind of like instantly start shaking his head type of thing. And Regan said that it was Anil on the phone, stating that he knew he had tipped him off. He had tipped the police off about his whereabouts and that he was going to turn him in. So he said he wasn't going to make it. So they kind of figure, well, that was a bust. Let's not do that. And they go back to the original plan of meeting Belinda. Regan was very upset about it again. He actually pulls Belinda aside, stating that, if they ask you about any of the work that's being done at your house, that's none of their business. Don't be telling them anything that I'm the one doing work at your house or anything like that. Well, Belinda found that very odd. She does the interview with the police, and the police kind of tell her they're on Regan, and if there was anything that kind of threw you off about him. And she's just like, she told him, she said, I don't want no part of this. She's like, yeah, he told me to tell y'all that, or he told me to say that, not to say anything about the work that was being done at my house. And they're like, what do you mean? What was being done at your house? And she told him that he was digging 2 big drain ditches. They snapped. They're just like, they took off to Dorsey. They got the special units team and went off to her house, and they start digging up this drain ditch. I do apologize, I forgot to tell you, it was said that when Regan found out that they were going to go back to Belinda and go and ask her questions, she did say that she found Horsey and Reese at her house again, that they were going to do more work on the barn. But at this point, it was just so normal for them to be doing work at her house. She didn't really think twice about it. She started feeling some type of way about it when Regan was the one that told her, don't mention it to the police that I've been doing work at your house. They get the special units involved, and they were digging for hours, but they were not able to find anything. They only found some jewelry, some hair follicles, and unfortunately they did find little buttons that would be on a baby suit. And so they realized that this was no longer a missing persons case, but a homicide investigation. And the main suspect was Regan. And he takes off to Europe. Him and Horsey actually take off to Europe. In April, some surfers were in Bournemouth, Dorset in the UK, and they said that they had seen 3 big floating objects in the water. So whenever the officials came out, they did identify this one to be Anil. So at this point, they go ahead and start putting these 3 men on the wanted, and they broadcast it to try to get some help. So they had the 3 of them on there: Peter Reese, William Horsey, and Kenneth Regan. And Horsey's son actually turned in the suitcase, a suitcase that was his father's, and inside of it were blank papers with Anil's signature. And these were the papers that were used to write the farewell letter to his employees. So it was about 12 days in that these men were on the run. And Reese, his conscience started getting the best of him. And they found Reese 12 days in at a pub. They got a hit off a caller, an owner of a hotel. Reese actually kind of told on himself because the lady didn't know what he was talking about. But Reese kind of asked, hey, is it okay if I stay here even though I'm wanted? And she's just like, what? Yeah, that's fine. So she ends up calling the authorities, and they get him. When they bring Reese in, he tells them everything. He says that Regan shot the 2 children, and I think that was the one that was weighing on his conscience, because he just said he couldn't take it to had watched those babies die. They were only 18 months, like a year and a half and 3 months, or 3 weeks, excuse me. And that is what got Reese. And they weren't really sticking with him anyways. They had booked it off to Europe without him. They kind of left him behind. 3 weeks later, Nancy was found by a fisherman, and this is her brother stating that he was just happy she was brought home because he was able to give her a proper burial. Regan was found first 2 months after the case was started. He was found in Belgium, and Horsey actually turned himself in a couple of days later from it. They did plead not guilty, but they had the confession from Reese about what happened. I don't want to do a lip because I feel like my eyes are bold enough. So we're just going to keep it simple. So it was a 9-month trial, and Regan and Horsey were continuing to plead not guilty. They did find Anil and Nancy but they still hadn't found the mother-in-law or the two children. And the only thing they were able to go off of was the phone records, the pings. Regan took Anil to meet up for the business meeting, and they had went to Regan's house. A couple of hours later, the two men went to London for several hours, and then they all came back. The two henchmen, Reese and Horsey, ended up coming back to Regan's apartment. And when they went to go check it out, they really couldn't find anything in the apartment. The carpet was new, it was ripped up, the furniture was new, and there was no clear evidence of any type of struggle or any homicide. There was nothing there. And what broke the case was when the autopsy had begun, or the embalming process had begun. The embalmer actually was undressing to prepare them, and the embalmer found a letter inside Anil's sock, and that letter was just pretty much junk mail, but it was addressed to Kenneth Regan, with Kenneth Regan's address of where the phones were pinged, where he was living. And the jury took it as this was Anil's way of telling who had did this to him, so they were able to charge them as guilty. Reese was given 23 years in prison, and Regan and Horsey were charged with 5 life sentences. After everything had passed, the mother-in-law, and unfortunately I cannot pronounce her name, I'm gonna put it down here so you can read it. I can't pronounce it, and I don't want to be rude, but it's an Indian name. And then the two children, unfortunately, they were never found, sadly. And the brother was very, very devastated, the one that started the investigation on Carr, but he found some peace to find out what happened to them, as well as getting the justice for them. And that is it, guys. I do appreciate y'all spending time with me. This is a look. I actually like this look. It wasn't planned at all, but I like it. I don't know about my lips though, but I didn't want to do too much because I felt like my eyes were really, really bold. But what do y'all think? I really like this case. It's unfortunate, but I really liked it just because there was just one person, and he kind of would have gotten away with it if her brother, if they didn't have such a good relationship, and he wouldn't have came out and looked at it. He was actually a journalist, and he actually wrote about it. So I am very happy that he was able to make waves for it, because if not, a whole family would have gotten hurt, and no one would have ever found out about it, because all of them just thought that they had went back to India. That is what I think. What do you think? I sound like Forrest Gump. But I do appreciate y'all to spend time with me, and I will see y'all Sunday. And tomorrow is Bailey Sarian. No, not tomorrow, on Monday. Bailey is coming back on Monday, so y'all definitely need to check her out. She is definitely the queen of this true crime, murder, mystery, and makeup. So go ahead and check her out, and thank you again, guys.